compared with pre-camera installation. And that's very, very exciting for someone like me. This is what I do. This has been a wonderful study to work on, and these are very, very encouraging results. They are preliminary, and there's a couple cities I still want to collect data on, but this was very, very encouraging. The p-value on the far right, if it's less than 0.05, that means it's statistically significant. This is 0.01, so this would be considered a significant finding. Now, just to make sure, because I have these crime reports, and I also have this data set of newspaper data. And it's nice if you have two different sources of data. You want to kind of test the validity of each. And also, it's nice if you have two sources that you think are good if you get similar findings, because that also enhances the validity of your study. So I did the same thing with the newspaper data, but only for those cities where I only got crime reports. So that's 8 camera cities that I showed you before, and then the 2 controls. And the distribution of homicides pre versus post camera installation. The newspapers, because they're going to catch more homicides because it's more in the media. I got almost double. I found 31 homicides for those camera cities pre-camera installation, and post it was still the remaining 2. So this was very interesting, and I knew that with the crime report data, I knew there was some underreporting. So now we know the level of underreporting that I'll see in the future if I continue to do studies with crime reports. So I ran that into a model too, just to compare these findings, the newspaper with the crime reports, and the bolded numbers underneath. That's my newspaper data. And so again, the rate ratio is less than 1. That shows that it suggests that there's a protective effect. That's exciting. 0.16 divided by 1, it's 6 point something. So it shows a 6-fold decrease in homicides among taxicab drivers, homicide rate post-installation versus pre-installation of cameras. And the p-value is less than 0.05. So that's a statistically significant finding. So I have confidence that there is a finding. Now, since I know that my crime report data and my newspaper data give similar consistent results, I have data on 28 cities for newspapers. So of course, being a researcher, I'm greedy with my data. So if I have data with 28 cities, I'm definitely going to run that statistical model, because that's just more power, and there's more confidence whenever I do any findings. So here I have 14 camera cities where I have newspaper report data, and then I have 14 control cities where I have newspaper data. And again, the numbers in parentheses, those represent the years where cameras were installed in the cabs, regardless of ordinance or industry-led initiative. So here, I ran my little statistical model, and again, I have a rate ratio. It's adjusted for the same things, that some cities are more dangerous than others. So it's adjusted for crime rates. And then it's also adjusted for the decreasing trend in homicide rate anyway that I must have there. And the p-value is less than 0.05, so it's statistically significant. And I find that the rate ratio is less than 1. So it's protective. It's 0.25 divided by 1. That means I have a 4-fold decrease in these 28 cities of taxicab homicides compared to pre-camera installation. And this is very important because I was not expecting this at all. This is extremely encouraging. I've looked at it so many different ways. Before I did the rates, I looked at just the counts by themselves, and that was also statistically significant, but then I added the rates. So I've done everything to add more data to make the study as rigorous as possible. And it seems that there is effect of having installed taxicab cameras and taxicabs for reducing homicide rates. What I have to say is that this is an ecological study. I'm only looking at cities. I cannot ascribe any value of risk on individual taxicab drivers. All I can say is that homicide rates of taxicab drivers in cities as a whole have decreased, and I'll go into that in a second. So the study limitations, I wouldn't be a good epidemiologist if I didn't show my dirty laundry. But there is, what I mentioned before, a possible underreporting of crime reports. That I think is pretty obvious, because for the same cities, same time period, I had 31 newspaper homicides reported compared to only 15 crime reports. So I was expecting a little bit of underreporting in crime report data, but I think it's just very hard for the police departments to retrieve this data as completely as the newspapers are able to get it. I was unable to determine the license status of the drivers. We already knew that, but that's a limitation. However, I don't think it was a problem in the study because I was still able to see an effect. Also, I was unable to evaluate safety trainings. That's something I'd like to do. Maybe in my next study, I'd like to take one city that has a very strong safety training component and kind of evaluate that safety training. We all know that some cities have wonderful safety trainings that probably are very helpful in educating and getting the taxi cab drivers to adopt good behaviors, good techniques for de-escalation towards violence. But there's so much variability in safety training across cities that there was no way I could measure this. Also, I was unable to evaluate the level of enforcement. I'm sure some regulators in some cities have more resources at their disposal than others, and maybe some are able to be out in the streets or just spend more time with their drivers or monitoring things more than others, and this might have an effect on the safety of the taxi cab driver. There was no way I could possibly measure that either, but it's something that must be said, and it's important. So the conclusions, I cautiously conclude the data suggest a protective effect from cameras for homicide rates. This is very exciting for where I come from. This is preliminary data. I'm going to add a few more cities just to make sure. I want to have all the cities in my universe as possible so I can make a strong statement as I can, because I know if somebody from here goes out to adopt an ordinance, you're going to need to defend it as much as possible. So I'm going to try and make the study the strongest that it can be, but it's already pretty strong. And and also I'm going to look at partitions. I'm going to look at the effect of partitions, because that's also, naturally, people are wanting to know about that too. I mentioned that it's ecological data, does not reflect individual risk of a taxi cab driver, but rather it's an aggregated experience. And we are planning a study to evaluate the individual risk of drivers with cameras versus drivers without in 3 cities. I'm not sure if we're going to stick with the same 3 cities. Ideally, now that I have these findings, I want to make sure that my colleague and I go out and we look at one city that has both cameras and partitions, or neither. New York City, I didn't realize was so mixed. That would be nice to use New York City as one. As one of the cities. But what we'd like to do is go and interview taxi cab drivers, a sample, and ask them about their experience in the past 12 months and compare those taxi cab drivers who have cameras in their cabs versus those who have partitions in their cabs versus those who have neither. And we'll need a few cities to do this. So Harlan Amandas, I'd like to acknowledge my boss. He's given me, he assigned this study to me when I first got to CDC. He's taken care of me and he's looked out for me, and I've had wonderful career development because of him. This is a very exciting study and population to be a part of. You don't know how privileged I am to be able to come to y'all's conferences and kind of be tolerated. And for a public health professional like myself, an epidemiologist, the ultimate is to be able to evaluate an intervention. So I'm very lucky. Also, Scott Hendricks, my statistician that I go crying to almost every day. Srinivas Kanda, who was very helpful with helping me organize the data. And also special thanks to Terry Wassel, who's an older statistician who has a wealth of experience, and he's very patient and kind with me. So this is Shanky's. I passed around Shanky's study on the table. That is extremely technical. I won't be presenting on that. I can't even comment on his work. He's brilliant, and what he's doing is he's taking about 6 or 7 different taxi cab cameras that are on the market, and he's setting them on fire. He's drowning them in water. He's doing all these things to these cameras to try and come up with kind of a Consumer Reports type thing on features every taxi cab camera should have, and no mention of any companies, but just features. So that handout is also on your table. But thank you for your patience. Thanks. And again, I am happy to take any questions, anything. Yes, sir?
Bill Rouse, Yellow Cab of Los Angeles. It seems to me that one of the major factors in the efficacy of the camera to prevent crime on the driver is not the camera itself, but the notice to the passenger that they're on the camera.
Yes, sir.
And so are you looking at that issue and making an evaluation of the quality of the signage? Because it's one of the things I've been concerned about in sort of overseeing our fleet's installation of cameras. And so thank you.
I agree. From my convenience store research, Houston passed an ordinance where they must have cameras, drop safes, other things, lighting issues, affidavits, trespass affidavits, and there's a whole section on signage. There's got to be about 10 different little signage things that they have to have on their doors before you even walk in. So I was also noticing that whenever I go around to cities, I'm almost positive in the U.S. In 2 cities, only 2 of the camera cities, and I think that was San Francisco. I mean, and that I saw just kind of from walking around. San Francisco and Seattle had an actual sign that said, it was a picture of a camera, so it was obvious, and I think it was on each window, and that's so important. So even if the camera's not working, even if maybe the camera's not there and it's something else, or even if whatever's going on, it's so important that they have that decal. And I think in Canada too, the camera cities were really good about having the decals, even though I think you call them decals, and that was really that's a huge part. I agree. That's a huge part of having cameras in the first place, is you have to advertise them. And just a little decal is perfect.